And thou shalt say of this land, and of that land, and of this people, and of that people, how it will be with them, and thou shalt not err. So here, this is basically describing the arc cycle of 3,000 years. Here is showing you in the Owaspy that Osiris, through THOTHMA, was given this prophecy of the 3,000-year cycles, that every 3,000 years, the climatic changes in the earth repeats itself, with the rise and falls of nations as well. Verse 21, THOTHMA the king called together his mathematicians, and according to their grade, chose from amongst them 1,200. These he divided into groups of 100 each, and he gave them a sufficient number of attendants, and he sent them toward all the sides of the world, alluding to them 16 years each for observing according to the commandments. So here he's showing you that the Egyptians at this time, this is during the time between the 3rd and the 6th dynasty, during the time when the pyramids was built. Verse 22, and they took with them all kinds of instruments to measure with, besides scribes to make the records of such matters as came before them. And they went throughout Arabia and India and Japheth and Persia and Hellas and Europe, even across to the western sea and to the southern extreme of Arabia and to the great kingdoms of the interior and to the north of Hellas and Persia and Japheth to the regions of everlasting snow. So here is showing you where they went. All throughout Arabia, India, Japheth, Persia, Hellas, Europe, and it said they crossed the western water, meaning they came to the shores of America. And there is proof that Egyptian monuments were found in this country of North America. Verse 23, and in 16 and 17 years they returned, except some who died on the journey. And most wonderful was the knowledge these mathematicians gained. In some countries they found philosophers who had the knowledge required even at their tongues. And THOTHMA received them in great pomp and awarded all of them with great riches. So here is showing you that the mathematicians took 17 years, and it stated that when they got to some of these countries, that the philosophers of those countries already had the knowledge acquired. So it's showing you that even when the Egyptians came to these other civilizations, that these civilizations was just advanced as the Egyptians as far as astronomy. In some of the countries, they found philosophers who had the knowledge required even at their tongue's end. So that's showing you right there that the Egyptians didn't go around the world building up everything. Verse 24, and THOTHMA had these things rewritten and condensed into books, and named them books of great learning, and they were deposited within the south chamber of the pyramid, where never harm could come to them. Verse 25, and THOTHMA made a law that other mathematicians should travel over the same regions for other 16 years and make like observations, and after them yet other mathematicians to succeed them, and so on for 3,300 years, and accordingly a new expedition started forth. Now during the absence of the first mathematicians, THOTHMA and his philosophers observed the sun, moon, and stars every day, and a record was made thereof as to the earth of THOTHMA's home kingdom. And these observations were reduced to tablets and maps, and a record made of them in Persian language, which was the language of the learned. For the Egyptian language of that day was spoken mostly by the unlearned, and was mixed with Phoenician, a language of sounds. So here again is showing you Persian influence within Kemet. Now you have a lot of Kemite scholars who's biased towards that, but I deal with the facts and the evidence presented. I don't deal with the bias or the prejudice. Verse 26, after the mathematicians returned, THOTHMA and his philosophers examined the whole matter as compared with the maps and tablets of the heavens, and the facts deduced therefrom were written in a separate book and called the Philosophies of God and his son THOTHMA, king of earth. Verse 29. Copies of this book were made and sent into the lands of Arabia, India, Japheth, Persia, Hellas, and Europe to the priests of God, but the original book was filed in the holy chamber in the temple of Osiris. Verse 28. THOTHMA applied himself to impart wisdom unto all men, and during his reign he built in the land of Egypt 77 colleges of great learning, 12 colleges of prophecy, 200 houses of philosophy, 7 adipteries, and 3,000 free schools, and 4,000 houses of sacrifice unto Osiris, Savior of men. Verse 29. 340 obelisks to God, 30 triumphal arches to Dais, 4,000 ansnus to the Creator, and these were mounted on pedestals of polished stone and stood at the street corners. Verse 30. And there were graduated to the rank of Adib during Thothma's reign more than 4,000 men and 300 women, all capable of the death trance and of going about in spirit, and of these over 700 were permitted within 30 years to test the cast of the holy chambers in the pyramids. And their spirits were conducted into Osiris' heavenly regions, and sojourned there for many days, and returned to their bodies unharmed. Because of the position of the chambers, there was no action upon their bodies while in the swoon. So here is showing you that it took years of study to perfect these things. As it stated, it took 30 years to be tested in the cast of the holy chambers in the pyramids. So these are the things that were going on in ancient Kemet, in these pyramids, dealing with deep meditation. Verse 31. Thus did Thothma prove himself to be one of the wisest and greatest men that ever dwelt on the face of the earth. He believed all things the gods told him, believed he was thought reincarnated, and believed he would never die as to the flesh. Verse 32. The false Osiris, through his servant god Egypt, had said to Thothma, This is the manner of heaven and earth as regardeth man. All men are reincarnated over and over until perfected into immortal flesh. And in that day, man hath so perfected his adeptism, he can remain on earth or ascend to heaven even when he desires. Hence, of all knowledge, adeptism is the greatest. Verse 33. Thothma asked if there were any new creations. Satan prompted Osiris, who said, Nah, thy spirit is old as the earth. At first it was small and round, like a grain of mustard. Only it was a spirit, and multiplied of these seeds comprised the whole unseen. When one of them taketh root in gestation, then is the beginning, and it is born into the world a frog, or an ass, or a worm, or a lion, or a small creeping thing. And it liveth its time and dieth, and the spirit hieth it back again into another womb, and it is born forth a man, low as to knowledge, evil as to life, and he liveth a time and dieth again. But again the spirit hieth back to another womb, and it is born forth again another man, but wiser as to knowledge, and lesser evil as to life, and this continueth to hundreds of generations and to thousands. But he who has attained adeptship hath it in his power to call forth out of the earth his own corporality. He needs no longer to go through the filth of others. Verse 34. Thothma was wise even in his belief, for when he was growing old, and beholding his flesh sunken, and his eyes growing hollow and dim, and his hands getting weathered, he inquired of the gods, saying, I know thou hast taught me truth, O God. I am weak before thee as to judgment, and curious in my vanity. Osiris said, Speak thou, O king. Verse 35. Thothma said, By all the force of my will, and by my great learning, I cannot stay the withering of the flesh. If therefore I already dry up like a mummy above the power of my will, how will it be with me when I am further emaciated? 36. Satan prompted Osiris to answer the king. And so he said, Until thou art even more emaciated, thou cannot understand the power of thy own soul. Verse 37. With this the king was reconciled, and even at the time he was tottering on his last leg, he began to build a new palace, saying, After I have changed this flesh into immortal flesh, hither will I come and dwell forever, and I shall be surrounded by adepts, wise and faultless. And this shall be the first colony of the king I will build on the earth. Verse 38. But afterward I will build my colonies of like kind, more and more of them, until I have all the earth redeemed to immortal flesh. For of such shall be my kingdom, and all men and all women on the earth shall own me Lord of all. Verse 39. Nevertheless, with all Thothma's wisdom and the wisdom of his gods, he fell on a stone and died suddenly on the day he was 100 years old. Now, Book of Wars Against Jehovah, chapter 51, verse 1 through 13, it states, When Thothma was quite dead, the priest carried his body into the temple, fully believing his spirit will return from heaven and transform the body from corruptible into incorruptible flesh to live forever. And they laid the corpse in the place previously designed by the gods, designated by the gods, and sealed it up according to the commandments of the false Osiris, savior of men. Verse 2. Osiris had said, Whoso believeth in me, him will I save unto everlasting life. And though he lose his body, yet again shall he find it. And the corruptible flesh shall be changed in the twinkle of an eye, and become incorruptible unto life everlasting, with the spirit that abides therein. Now, these very sayings you can even find in the scriptures, showing you that a lot of sayings in the scriptures were crept in from a lot of the ancient Egyptian papyruses and inscriptions. A lot of the Bible has a lot of ancient Egyptian and Babylonian influence in it. You got to distinguish what is what. Verse 3. On the fifth day the priest opened the chamber, for according to the laws of miracles, on that day the spirit should accomplish the feat. But lo and behold, it came not, and the body still lay cold and dead. But the gods came in Sargos and said unto the priest, Seal ye up the body for other 5 days. And the priest did as commanded. And after that they examined it again, but life had not returned. Again they were commanded to seal it up for other 5 days, which they did, but life returned not. Verse 4. Hoaka, who was now the high priest, inquired of Osiris concerning the matter. And Osiris, through his servant god Egypt, answered him, saying, Go fetch a young man who is warm in the blood, which is life in the flesh, and he shall be the 7th son of an Adab, and know how to cast himself in death. Verse 5. And the priest brought Exeon, who was in his 24th year, and when he came into the holy chamber, he cast himself in death for benefit of the king's soul. And Exeon thus cast himself, and he was sealed in the chamber of death for 5 days along with the king's corpse. And in 5 days the priest brought both bodies into the holy chamber, according to instructions. And Osiris came and commanded them to stand around the bodies. And when they had done so, the angels from Osiris' kingdom came and spirited away the body of the king. And they brought back the spirit of Exeon to inhabit the body of Exeon, and put it in possession thereof, making believe it was the spirit of THOTHMA returned. So here is showing you how these angels are deceiving mortals into their doctrines, playing games on a high level. Verse 6. Haoka said to the gods, Where is the body of THOTHMA? Hath it been transformed? And the gods answered, It hath gone to heaven, and will return after many days. But as to the spirit of the king, behold, he is with thee. And the priest spoke to Exeon, believing it was THOTHMA. And after 3 days they came forth out of the temple, and recrowned Exeon, THOTHMA the second. And they proclaimed it abroad that these things were true. Howbeit they knew to the contrary. So they knew it was false, but they proclaimed it as truth. Verse 7. As to the spirit of THOTHMA at the time of death, it was taken to Ago-Adin and put amongst the servants of Osiris' heavenly kingdom, and thus enslaved. So Exeon became king of Egypt. So here is showing you that at the time of THOTHMA's death, his spirit was taken into the heavenly kingdom of Osiris and thus enslaved. So as I stated before, these are the purpose of these false deities, to win your soul on earth, to convince you with their doctrine and inspire a whole nation with that same doctrine. And when you pass on into the spirit realm, you are beneficial to them now. You become servants in their heavenly kingdoms. And these same implications are being applied today. The same way you worship these false deities of today, you will be servants and slaves to their heavenly kingdoms after death. This is the purpose of them inspiring mortals on earth to win souls in heaven. Verse 8. Now as regardeth the false gods, Osiris and his confederates, they never tried to reincarnate the spirit of THOTHMA, but because of the virtue and wisdom of THOTHMA, they used him for benefit of Osiris' heavenly kingdom, and to establish Osiris' heavenly kingdom on earth as the all-highest God. Verse 9. As to the kingdoms of the land of Egypt, which succeeded THOTHMA, the inhabitants of the earth already know the chief part. For hundreds and hundreds of years the Egyptians were the most learned people in the world, and especially in a knowledge of the stars and the sun and the moon, and in adeptism and in miracles. But woe came unto them. The land became flooded with hundreds of millions of Jujers, which are spirits of darkness. And as to the people of Egypt, the chief desire was to be able to return in spirit after death and dwell with mortals. And these things which follow are not even lawful to mention. Verse 11,